Joining us now with a reaction, Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis, Saul Weisenberg, Deputy Independent Counsel in the Whitewater investigation of Bill Clinton, and Attorney Scott Bolden. Gentlemen, it's great to see all of you. Saul, let's start with you. You're an expert in indictments. You've unpacked a lot of them in your career. Tell us about this one and your reaction to the 13 Russians named.
Well, it's a very narrow indictment. It's what the main count is what we call a Klein conspiracy under the general conspiracy statute. And it basically says that the Russians involved here conspired to defraud federal governmental functions. There are three chief examples. One, they lied on their visa applications. Two, they lied to the Federal Election Commission by withholding the fact that they were getting foreign money. And third has to do with the Foreign Agent Registration Act. They should have registered as foreign agents, and they didn't. And one thing that I don't think anybody has picked up on, I don't know how significant it is, legally it's not that significant. The indictment doesn't even allege that these Russians were part of the Russian government. It just says that they were Russian organizations. But Laura, it's very narrow. It's a very narrow charge.
And this is what Congressman Heck, Danny Heck, said earlier today about whether Donald Trump is truly vindicated by this narrow indictment. Let's watch.
Defendants knowingly and intentionally conspired with each other, and here's the relevant language, and with persons known and unknown to the grand jury to defraud the United States, et cetera, et cetera. This indictment of these 13 individuals is not the end of it, just like the indictments of Mr. Manafort, Mr. Gates, Mr. Flynn, and Mr. Papadopoulos weren't the end of it at all. To be continued.
Congressman DeSantis, the president, seemed to feel like he was vindicated in his tweet today, but is that a little premature?
Well, Laura, I mean, remember, this whole thing started with allegations played up by the media and my Democratic colleagues that there was a criminal conspiracy between Trump's campaign and the Russian government to subvert the election. This indictment doesn't even come close to doing that. And in fact, for Rod Rosenstein to say no Americans were involved and it had no effect on the election, it just shows you that they have been promising and promoting this narrative for over a year now, really a year and a half. And at this stage, I don't see why you need a special counsel for any of these indictments. They are all run-of-the-mill cases that could be handled by the Justice Department.
But they also said known and unknown. They also said people known and unknown did conspire with the Russians. Couldn't that then? And I haven't been a lawyer for a while, so Saul, you can, Saul and Scott can contradict me. But doesn't that leave the door open for future? Naming a future individual.
But you'd have to ask yourself, Laura, on this,
Laura, virtually all indictments, conspiracy indictments have that language. But Rod Rosenstein did not say that there was no collusion with the Trump campaign. He says this indictment doesn't allege that there was collusion.
Exactly.
And this indictment doesn't allege that the election was affected. So you can't say anything broader than that.
Yeah. I certainly have to agree with my colleague. You know, I don't really know what the Republicans are celebrating. This is one bucket. This is one indictment of cyberspace. This investigation continues.
Well,
every chance you get, you want to say that there's no collusion.
Well, I think
this vindicates the president.
Right.
It certainly doesn't.
It's interesting.
One part of a puzzle.
I agree with that. It's a narrow indictment, but I think it is very key that the Russian involvement in this election was both pro-Trump, anti-Trump. They're working for helping Jill Stein at one point. I mean, they seem to have their hands all over everything.
I would too. If I were the Russians and I was sowing discord in support of Trump over HRC, I would certainly do both.
So
they were promoting voter suppression as well in the black community.
That have pro and anti-Trump rallies on the same day. I mean, Ron, you can chime in on this. To me, that seems like a stretch. I mean, I think Saul is right. This is one indictment. The idea that Mueller's going to kind of close up shop tomorrow, we just got $10 million in that ridiculous Republican budget that was just signed. Another $10 million into the special counsel's office. I don't know why he needs $10 million if he's going to wrap it up. But Ron, Congressman DeSantis,
Laura, I mean, so we have all this time that's happened, it's elapsed. Congressional committees, special counsel, And what evidence is there of collusion other than the Steele dossier, which has been discredited? And so I think it's one thing to say that there were Russian nationals or even Russian government involved, although I would note none of the hacking, which I thought was the most serious, none of that was alleged in the indictment, and that was not something that's dealt with. So that's what you have, and I just think that so much of this has been based off wishful thinking by the press and the Democrats and the Steele dossier rather than hard facts.
But what about what about the Republicans who are leading all of these investigations and certainly believe that there was Russian meddling? Let me tell you something. I'm a former prosecutor, right? Prosecutions don't start at the top and go down. They start at the bottom. It's called a pyramid prosecution. And you start at the bottom until you get to the top and you cut the top off. You cut the head of the pyramid prosecution off.
There's a difference
this is
between...
one bucket. Hold on. There's just one bucket of cyberbullying.
Right.
There was other collusion and other facts that are still being investigated. So
Russian meddling is different than a criminal conspiracy between Trump and the Russian government. That's a huge leap, and there's not been evidence to make that leap.
No, they haven't.
Not right now, but it may.
But they haven't offered, I think, anything on that front. And Rosenstein essentially said that today. I mean, that's not what they're talking about in this indictment.
Exactly.
But Saul, I want to go into this more with you, because when you see the amount of time they have had, they've interviewed a lot of people, they've reviewed a lot of documents. It is quite something, I think, at this juncture in the investigation, to come up with, okay, they were trying to manipulate the election. Like, who didn't think that the Russians were trying to manipulate and get involved in the election? But before Trump was even announced as a candidate, they were meddling. And what did the Obama administration do exactly to stop it? They were helping, last time I checked, they were approving sales of to almost 20% of our uranium supply to a Russian company bought through a Canadian company. I mean, you start talking about the ways we helped Russia. We helped Russia a lot during the Obama administration.
Well, that's true. That's true. It's more of a political and historical point. And as you point out, the indictment says it started in 2014, well before Trump announced. But listen, there's no question. What Scott says is right. It's a piece of the puzzle. But what the congressman said is correct too. I mean, it is a good day for President Trump. It is significant that the investigation has gone on this long, and you don't have the collusion case. And keep in mind, as Andrew McCarthy has pointed out, if you look at the Flynn plea papers and you look at the Papadopoulos plea papers, but particularly Flynn's, it looks like there is going to be no collusion case, certainly no collusion that Flynn would have known about. So all signs do point to the fact that there will not be a major, and when I say collusion,
I mean, there's no collusion. There's no collusion. But there's going to be what? But what? But what are they looking for? They're looking for obstruction of justice, interfering with the investigation.
Absolutely. You wouldn't have Trump.
Where's the evidence of that?
But look, you wouldn't have Trump.
There's no obstruction. There's no obstruction.
You don't know that. The investigation's not over yet.
Based on the evidence. I know that, Scott.
Go ahead.
All right. So it's
Based
pure
on the
conjecture
evidence
what
in the
you're
public
saying.
record, there is no obstruction case. Period.
Well, we've got the president's own words. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with you.
Ron,
but I think there's a lot of evidence there. But you wouldn't have Donald Trump.
It's not a rabbit hole. It's the law.
Well, the law's in the rabbit hole.
Hey, Ron, right now, I mean, the Democrats have turned up the heat on the Republican committees looking into this, because they're arguing that, you guys are just interfering with what the special counsel is trying to get at. So these indictments come out today. And what's next for the House investigations?
Oh, the House investigation is going to continue. The State Department is next, kind of under the microscope. And then we are in the House, going to scrutinize people like Jim Clapper and John Brennan and see their role in this. But I can tell you, Laura, 6 months ago, people didn't know that the Democrats paid for the dossier. What's happened since then? You've had a lot of very senior people in both the DOJ and FBI either get demoted or leave the government. They wouldn't have done that if they had done everything by the book.
And I've got to say, John Brennan, speaking of Brennan, all of you will love this tweet. He sent out a tweet today after the indictment came out. He said, DOJ statement and indictments reveal the extent and motivations of Russian interference in 2016 election. Claims of a hoax in tatters. My take, implausible that Russian actions did not influence the views and votes of at least some Americans. Okay, I guess, but how does that justify a special counsel being called on this president. But when Rosenstein picked the special counsel, said we got to do the special counsel, that was based on what, Saul? I go back to Rod's decision to call the special counsel, which I think was absurd on its face. You can close it out.
I disagree. I think it absolutely is called for by the regulation, just like the President Obama should have appointed a special counsel. But he had the point is you can't have the administration that has been accused of throwing an election investigating itself. If you look
what was the probable cause or any indication that a crime had been committed?
You don't have to have probable cause under the regulation. And look, I think that Loretta Lynch should have appointed a special counsel because of the Hillary Clinton email thing. You don't have to, but the point is the language of the special counsel regulation allows you to do it. So
you can do a lot. Doesn't mean you should. Ron, your take, and then Scott, and then we got to
go. Rod Rosenstein in the appointing order did not identify the crime to be investigated. He said investigate Comey's counterintelligence investigation. The regulations only allow for a special counsel for a criminal investigation. He did not do that, and that's why a lot of us have been concerned that this investigation doesn't have any real limits.
Scott,
that's not accurate. That's simply not accurate.
Scott's got the last
investigating Russian meddling in the election and whatever else that pathway.
Yeah, that happened before Trump ever announced that he was going to run for president.
You had to have a special prosecutor.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. And by the way, Russia is planning another brazen